Hi, and welcome to The Working Songwriter, the show where today's best songwriters come to talk shop. I'm your host, Joe Pug. Each episode here we host a distinguished guest, and we ask them to go deep on their inspiration, on their process, on the general ups and downs of making a life in music. So, whether you're a grizzled veteran, begrudgingly joining TikTok to promote your new greatest hits album, or else a scrappy upstart, begrudgingly filing taxes for the first time after a few years of under-the-table bar gigs, this is your show, because ultimately it is what every writer seeks most, an ironclad excuse to put off actually writing. Hey everybody, it's the third Friday of October 2022, and I thank you for joining us. This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. I'm old enough to remember when you had to pay somebody called a web developer to get a website made, and it would always be some guy named Howie who drove one of those pristine Ford F-150s that's never been on a job site a day in its life, and is like candy apple red, and who was always trying to sell you loose Pall Mall cigarettes in sandwich baggies. And old Howie would charge you about $1,000 for a website that would be obsolete in 6 months. But it's the future now, you guys. That's not how it works anymore. We're allowed to have nice things now. One of those nice things is Bandzoogle. Bandzoogle powers the websites of tens of thousands of musicians around the world, from weekend warriors to Grammy winners. All the features you need for a professional website are already built in. Hosting and a custom domain name, dozens of fully customizable design templates, tools to sell your music, and merch commission-free. Listeners to the Working Songwriter podcast can go to bandzoogle.com to try it for free for 30 days. Use the promo code TWS, the initials of our show, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. If you'd like to hear some of my music live in the coming weeks, the first Sunday night of every single month at 9 p.m. Eastern, I'm over on my YouTube channel for Sunday Songs. That's a live stream. I'm live, I'm playing tunes live, I'm taking questions in the live chat, I'm taking requests in the live chat. It's a really fun, really interactive experience. I dare to say that we're building something of a little community over there on Sunday nights, including many people who are listeners of this podcast. So come on over and be a part of it. It's the first Sunday night of every month at 9 p.m. Eastern over on YouTube. Head on over to joepugmusic.com and click on the live stream tab to set a reminder. Finally, if you enjoy this podcast, if you'd like to help it remain a viable endeavor for me, here's a couple things that you could do to help. First, you could become a supporter of the show over at Patreon. Patreon is a platform that allows you to directly support creative endeavors that you find meaningful. You just head to their site, Patreon. You search for The Working Songwriter, or you search for my name, and then you sign up to kick in a few bucks every month for the show. Think of it as a voluntary subscription. A subscription that you certainly don't have to pay for, but that you choose to pay for because you dig the show and because you won't miss a few bucks at the end of the month. If just 1% of our listenership would kick in the price of a cup of coffee every month, it would make an immense difference. So thank you to everybody who's taken the time and the capital to support the show in that way. And if you're not in a place where you can contribute in that way, it's totally understandable. You could still help us out in a couple ways for free. First, you could leave us a rating in the iTunes store, or second, you could simply tell a friend about the show. Spread the word about the show. The simple math on those two things is that they will help me much more than they will be a pain in the ass for you. Okay, I'll end all the harassment there. I hope that you enjoy this week's chat. Our guest this month hails from Jackson, Tennessee, where he was inspired to cast his lot in the entertainment business by the killer, Jerry Lee Lewis. Ash Bowers began his career as the frontman for music group 45 South, who toured extensively and even had an album produced by Bret Michaels of Poison. He would then move to Nashville and strike out on a solo career that saw several singles hit the Billboard Hot Country charts. He's written for Montgomery Gentry, Keith Urban, Randy Houser, and many others. He's a jack of all trades because more recently he has seen success as a producer and artist manager. He founded the company Wide Open Music and manages the careers of Jimmy Allen and Matt Stell, a few alumni from our show here. Of all the guests we've had on our program over the last 6 years, I'm not sure that anyone has had as much varied experience as Ash on both the music and the business side. So it was an absolute pleasure to catch up with him on the phone a few weeks ago to hear about his musical journey so far. Ash Bowers, thanks so much for being a part of the Working Songwriter podcast. There's a lot to get to today because you've worn so many different hats in music, lead singer of a band, songwriter for yourself and others, manager, owner of a company. You've kind of seen it all, but where I'd like to start is where you started, in Jackson, Tennessee. What did music look like in your household growing up?
Man, my mother was a big fan of Elvis. First concert I ever attended was Sawyer Brown. She was a big Sawyer Brown fan. Billy Ray Cyrus, there's a lot of that. Reba, just a whole lot of that era of country music is what my mother listened to. And then, later in life, as a teenager, we, attended church pretty regularly in a small Southern Baptist church. And we, man, it was just, a lot of church hymns. And I started, first performing in church, and I'd get up and sing a song, every once in a while at church and do that kind of thing. But, my first influence was Jerry Lee Lewis. I was a huge fan of his music. I watched the movie Great Balls of Fire, I think when I was 8 years old, and just instantly became a fan. And I was just, so intrigued and interested in music from that point on, and loved Jerry Lee's music. Piano was my first instrument. That's the first thing I learned to accompany myself with, as far as instruments go. And, but that was it, man. It was a lot of country music, a lot of gospel hymns, and a lot of, rock and roll from the era of Elvis Presley and Jerry Lee Lewis, a lot of Sun Records era music. And man, that was it. And I never really, got too far out of those boxes.
That's two opposite ends of the spectrum: the church and the killer. You're
Right.
you're one of the first people to come on this show and cite the killer, which I love. I mean, he is just such a force of nature. Did you ever get to see him live?
I never got to see him live. I actually got an invitation, though. Jimmy and I did to he's being brought into the Country Music Hall of Fame, this year. So I may get to go down there and put eyes on him, which would be awesome. He was just such a huge influence. I've read a lot of books about him, and just, man, he's just, and Memphis being so close to Jackson where I grew up, it almost seemed like a bit of a connection, to that space and that world too. And Carl Perkins was from Jackson, Tennessee. I actually used to work. He owned a restaurant in Jackson. He and his son-in-law called Swade's, and I used to work there when I was a teenager for a short period of time. So I just love that piece of history and the music that came out of it during that time.
It's interesting. So you felt maybe a bit of more of a kinship with the music tradition that came out of Memphis than you did at first with Nashville.
Yeah, I think absolutely, because I heard music in the car or on the radio at home, but the first time I was ever just really like, oh wow, like I was completely dialed into it was Jerry Lee Lewis. So I think that was, to me, probably led me more in that direction at an early age than Nashville did.
That's interesting, man. Yeah, it's worth reading about Jerry Lee Lewis. I heard an interview once with Henry Rollins, of all people, who is not a small guy, and he talked about going to Jerry Lee Lewis's house to interview him, and it being the most intimidating experience of his life. Like he was just scared for himself when he got there.
Oh wow, that's amazing. It doesn't surprise me. I've read several books, that were kind of similarly written, where they interviewed him at his home and stuff. And he's just an intriguing guy, man. I mean, he's the last one of the whole Sun Records family that's still alive. He had such not only just a crazy career, but a crazy life, man. I mean, this guy just and you hear about him in other books. I read Carl Perkins' book, Go Can't Go, and he talks a lot about Carl talks a lot about Jerry Lee in that book. And it just seems like everybody has the same story, and most have the same opinion of Jerry Lee and what kind of guy he was. But he was unapologetic about it. I think to this day he still is, and he struggled so much, with but it seems seemingly between, the rock and roll lifestyle, and then also, coming from such a strong upbringing in church, with his family. It was and of course his Mickey Gilley and the televangelist, I can't think of his name, that was his cousin, Jimmy Swaggart. I mean, these guys, it was just seems like a constant force. And I think even Elvis, battled with a lot of the same internal struggles. And so it was just an interesting time in our American history and in musical history. And it seems like I can never learn too much about it. And it just seemed like such a cool time in the world.
Yeah, there was really no roadmap for that crew of guys that were coming up then. Like they had really come from genuine obscurity, and they'd even grown up in a time when there was no mass media at all to speak of. Like it just didn't even technologically exist. And then they were the first ones to be plastered all over the airwaves, both TV and radio. And that'd be a hell of a thing to deal with now, even when there's a roadmap, much less, 70 years ago when there wasn't.
Yeah, and I think now it's like, we've seen it firsthand, and, it's like guys like, I've seen it firsthand with guys like Jimmy, like, there's so many people that, that have dealt with it and, had a quick rise to fame and been all over TV and stuff. So you have people around you that can coach you through it because they've been there. And, we've got publicists, we've got, teams of people and, managers and, even just friends in the business that are other celebrities. Like these guys nowadays, they have them to lean on. They have help. They have coaches to help coach them through it and kind of, as best they can prepare them for what's about to happen and what their life's about to be like. And I think that makes it easier. And yeah, I totally agree. I can't imagine, what it would have been like to just have to go into that blind and being the first one to be, as famous as Elvis or any of these guys. I mean, it's unbelievable.
So you had a similar upbringing in the church as you were talking about there. And was it that performance in church where you first got bit by the bug to do it yourself? Or when did you start thinking that music could be a path forward for you?
I started performing in doing like fairs, talent contests, fairs and festivals and stuff. I would accompany myself with the piano to sing Great Balls of Fire, or I'd do like just a medley of a couple of Jerry Lee songs on the piano. And then I started doing, some performances in church. And, I don't know that I ever just, can really just put a finger on a time when it was just like, man, I feel like I'm bit by the bug or I've really, love to perform or want the attention. I love music so much. And I think that was the biggest driver for me. Whether it was listening to music or learning to play music or performing music or writing music it's just always been a real passion. And I think, man, it's interesting because if I love to perform, and I love being the artist, when I was an artist, and I love, being on the road and doing that. But looking back on it, I think I think my path was always, I just wanted to be in the music business. I just wanted to do this for a living. I wanted to be around it. When I first came to Nashville in 2000, gosh, when I really started coming to Nashville and writing songs was mid 2007, and I'd already toured all over the world and with a band and played a ton of dates and made records with those guys. And as bands usually do, we broke up, and I met a guy at one of the last gigs I played with my band, and he just came up to me after the stage. This was in Dallas or Fort Worth, just right outside of Dallas, at a place called Firewater Bar and Grill. And a guy came up to me named David Gamble, and he gave me a business card, and he said, "Hey man, did you write those songs?" And I said, "Yeah, most of them." And he said, "Well, man, if you ever get up around Nashville, man, I'd love to take you to lunch." And he's like, I started a small publishing company. I'm in the healthcare business, but I've got this other company, and I'm friends with a guy named Tony Stampley, and he writes for my company. So he said, "Man, I'd love to take you to lunch and maybe help plug you into the system up there if you're ever close to Nashville." And I said, "Well, believe it or not, I live in Jackson." So I ended up, building a relationship with David just in the community. He plugged me into so many, good rooms early on. But I remember at that time, I didn't even know what a publishing deal was. And I'd, probably played 1,000 gigs over the, previous years before that, leading up to it. And it's just, I would have toted somebody's guitar, around for them if I thought it would have kept the lights on, for me just to be in the music business. And I often feel that same way now. I just, regardless of what it is that I'm doing, I don't think I ever really just had the passion and desire that it takes to be an artist, to be the next level of artist. It gives the performing and willing to do all it takes and to be a really successful country music artist. But I think I found my place just being around it and helping other people have the careers that, and help navigate those for the Jimmys and the Matt Stells. And so I think the bug's always been there, but it's always just been because I love music, not because I just had a desire to be famous or a real passion to go out here and play stadiums.
Was that a scary transition for you to go from playing with the band to, driving to Nashville yourself to start writing on your own and making a go of it on your own? Because, you kind of glossed over it there for a second saying, well, I was in a band, but, you weren't just in a band. Your band 45 South, like you guys cut a couple records. You, as you said, you toured a lot. Like it was a real thing that you were doing. So what was that transition like to leave the band and go out on your own? Did you ever hit a moment of, was it scary? Did you hit self-doubt there or was it invigorating?
You know what? I think I don't think it was scary for me. We were doing 200-300 dates a year from 2004 to 2006 or 7 ish. And man, I think those guys we were all friends. We were all buddies that were in the band. And I think, we kind of hit a ceiling, as far as the band goes. I think we all felt like that. We were at an interesting place in life where we were all, 26, 27 years old. A couple of the guys are getting married. They're starting, to have probably a desire for a more, stable situation than, being on a bus somewhere in South Texas, for 2 weeks straight, playing gigs and trying to grow a grassroots career as a band. And I think when the transition happened, I think all of us were just ready for something different, and not only just out of music, but just out of life. And one of the guys that's interesting is he owns a piano store there in Jackson, and he does very well with that. There's another guy our bass player owns a really successful just music store that sells instruments and teaches lessons and does all this. And so I think everybody, ended up with their hand, somehow and being able to keep music part of their life. And for me, I was so excited because I always loved songs. I loved great songwriters. And when I came to Nashville, when I started that commute to transition, I was like, man, I'm just going to go to Nashville and write songs and, you know, kind of figure things out on my own. And man, I was a credit guy, credit reader. Like I knew all the songs Jeffrey Steele had written and the Craig Wasens and the Bob DiPieros and all these guys. So I knew who were writing the songs, and I was so excited to make the transition to, man, possibly end up in a room with one of those guys writing a song. And I knew it was a network game, and I knew it was, man, just working as hard as you could, always being present, showing up, and just as a fan of the song, it would have been, you know, really practically, you know, next to impossible to build the network that I needed to become a songwriter like these guys that were my heroes when I would, you know, again, trying on the road, trying to build a grassroots career with a band. So it wasn't scary. It was actually, I've always been one to, you know, for the most part, to be able to look at the bright side of things and see the silver lining. So for me, it was just a new opportunity. It was, again, another opportunity to learn more about the music business and hopefully figure out where my place was and where to land.
So when you start building that network with those guys, people that you admire and, you know, people who are your peers at the time, what did you, early on, what did you realize that you needed to improve at as a songwriter? Like, what were you having to learn? What lessons on a technical and songwriting level were you having to learn early on when you arrived?
You know, everything. I feel like I always wanted to be the worst songwriter in the room, because then I knew I was learning, but I always knew, like, even though we were making records with the band, like Bret Michaels from Poison produced a record on us. He was you know, he loved the band idea and the thing, and he kind of just jumped on board and like, hey, let me help you guys. I love what you're doing. This is cool. This is a band. Poison was a band. You know, it's kind of a thing. And he was always so excited about the songs. And I wrote, you know, most of those songs, you know, by myself in the back of a bus, or, you know, a guitar player or a drummer would come back there and hang out and help write some stuff. But I think until I got to town and started writing songs with the people that are in town that were writing commercial country music, like I always felt like there was so much room for improvement, because I wanted to be writing songs like what I was hearing on the radio. You know, I was a Kenny Chesney fan, a Tim McGraw fan, a Montgomery Gentry fan. And so, like, I wanted to write songs that were that good. And I knew I wasn't doing that by myself. And again, it was just because I wasn't exposed to the community. And I hadn't done it enough. And if I wanted to write songs like those on the radio, I needed to learn from the guys that were writing them. So when I got to town, it was just like, man, whatever be the opportunity, I'm going to jump on it and take it to get in as many rooms as I possibly can.
Can you remember one of those lessons, like a specific lesson that you learned in a particular session about writing that you've taken with you over time and maybe passed on yourself to others?
Man, you know, not a specific instance, but, you know, one of the things I learned really quick was, man, we don't need to keep saying what everybody else is saying. Like, you know, you've got your cliche lines and the certain things that everybody's, you know, you hear it in a song. By the time I write a song that is in that same vein or same direction, it's already old news by the time I write it and try to get it on the radio with somebody else. And I think authenticity, I think, is probably the most valuable thing that a songwriter can possess, because, you know, you look at guys like, you know, the Jeffrey Steeles and Jonathan Singleton, who's, you know, I've known, he's from Jackson. I've known him for years too, but like, and even the Craig Wasens, like, they have an identifiable thing that they do. And I think that's attractive to artists, because they're also trying to figure, especially new artists, they're trying to figure out which lane they're naturally in. And a lot of times, man, they just latch on to what that guy's doing. That has such a brand as a songwriter. And I think, you know, when people want Pray For You, they're going to call, you know, they'll call me, and if they want, man, My Town, or What Hurts the Most, they'll call Jeffrey Steele. And if they want Watching Airplanes, they're going to call Jonathan Singleton. And I think as a songwriter coming to town, it's like, you need to find what that brand is and what that thing is that you do, you know, and be unapologetic about it and double down on it and just do it, because, like, that's what separates I feel like that's what separates songwriter of the year from guy that's had a couple of cuts, or a couple of, or ended up with a single. It's like, they know, like people, these artists, they know what they're going to get if they go write a song with Jim Collins or with Trent Thomas. I mean, they know, because these guys have a brand. They're not just in a room trying to sneak a line in here and there. And I think that's the most valuable thing I've learned. I'm still learning that. I've learned that over the past, I've been learning that for the past 10 years, and I've really focused and tried to be more intentional about it over the past 5 years.
I feel like that lesson that actually would transfer like across disciplines in a way, because if thinking about it myself and what you just said there, you think about the people who are world class at what they do in whatever it is. And typically their strategy is to not be, proficient and pretty good at a lot of things. They figure out what they're excellent at, and then they double down and they take all of their energy and they try to get even more excellent at that one thing that they can do. And that's what makes someone world class.
Absolutely. And if Jerry Lee had started trying to play the drums and the guitar when he was 22 years old, he would have never been what he is. You know what I mean? He would have never had that career. And you're exactly right. You can't. And look, I do know a lot of people that have been successful at, being the guy that does a lot of things really good. But I think in music, and I think across the board in so many different brands, like I think the brands that are the most successful, whether it's an artist or whether it's a songwriter or whether it's a vehicle or a pair of shoes or a sporting goods store, it's like, man, they have this thing and it's their thing, and it's very identifiable. And I think there's so many people trying to be, in the songwriting game or in the, being an artist. And I think you look back across all genres, you find the ones, you look at the ones that are the most successful. They had a lane, and they dug a trench right through the middle of that lane, and they stayed in that lane for a long time. And look, even songwriters, the Bobby Pinsons and the Jeffrey Stills, these guys had huge moments, and then they would go a couple of years that weren't as lucrative, and then they would have another huge moment a few years later, and they have these peaks in their career, but they never stopped doing what they did. They just, it's the business kind of just kept coming back to it because they needed that. And I think I think we can learn a lot from that.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes writers and artists can kind of get ahead of themselves because they've finished the song or because they've finished doing a certain thing. They just assume that listeners have caught up with them at that point. And it's almost never the case. Listeners always catch up like 4 years later. One of my favorite success stories is I remember when that band Mumford and Sons came out. They came out with a record, and it was kind of like underground and kind of indie appreciated. And then when they got a chance to put it out on a bigger level, what they did with their second record is it sounded a lot like the first record. You know what I mean? And because they understood that people weren't really going to start listening on a global scale until that second one. And so then when that hit, they were in that lane that you're talking about. They had remained in that lane as people caught up with them. And that's what made it a smash, in my opinion.
Sure. Absolutely. And it's the same thing with, I think, in any genre. It's like, if I want to go listen to, songs about, if I want to go listen to a specific young feeling party back road anthem, I'm going to go to a Florida Georgia Line record. But had those guys tried to do everything, they may not be my first choice. And so it's again, it's a brand. You're putting a brand out into the world, and I think consumers want to know what they're getting, and they need to know that. And I think that's how you create, an artist that streams 20 million streams a month or a week versus an artist that doesn't do that much. Because again, it's just, you walk into Walmart, you know what you want, you go get it. And if it's a brand that you like, you go straight to that. You don't try all the different brands of peanut butter. You go get the Jiffy if that's what you like, so you can go straight to it and walk out the door. And I think music is the same exact thing.
Are you stuck in a rut? Are you tired of listening to that Jimmy Buffett 20th Century Masters CD over and over again and need some new music? Are you sick of making hamburger helper beef stroganoff for dinner every night and you want something new to cook? What you are looking for, my friends, is the Enthusiast Digest. That's my monthly newsletter, which arrives in your inbox the first Sunday morning of every month, bursting with musical recommendations, poetry selections, recipes and cooking techniques for my favorite dishes, and items of general interest culled from the vast cesspool that is the internet. The Enthusiast Digest is free to subscribe to. If you dig the poetry that you hear on this show and the artists that you're hearing from, you'll dig the newsletter because I approach it with the exact same sensibility of curation. Go to joepugmusic.com/newsletter today to sign up for free. That is joepugmusic.com/newsletter. It takes approximately 15 seconds to sign up for a free newsletter that will enrich the first Sunday of your month with a veritable cornucopia of new and delightful recommendations. That's the Enthusiast Digest, the first Sunday of every month. Sign up for free at joepugmusic.com/newsletter. Toward the end of our conversation, you'll hear Ash describe prioritizing his family by stepping away from his artist career. There's a famous basketball coach from my neck of the woods in Prince George's County, Maryland. His name was Morgan Wooten, and his tagline was God, family, and basketball in that order. And I find the best way of keeping things in order in my own life is by focusing on beauty. And there's a wonderful poem by Julie Cadwallader Staub that speaks to this. It's entitled Reverence. The air vibrated with the sound of cicadas on those hot Missouri nights after sundown when the grown-ups gathered on the wide back lawn, sank into their slung-back canvas chairs, tall glasses of iced tea beating in the heat. And we sisters chased fireflies, reaching for them in the dark, admiring their compact black bodies, their orange stripes, and seeking antennas as they crawled to our fingertips and clicked open into the night air. In all the days and years that have followed, I don't know that I've ever experienced that same utter certainty of the goodness of life that was as palpable as the sound of the cicadas on those nights. My sisters, running around with me in the dark, the murmur of the grown-ups' voices, the way reverence mixes with amazement to see such a small body emit so much light. What was the transition like for you to move from first band and then into an artist career in Nashville? And now, obviously, you work not only on the producer side, but also on the management and business side for artists other than yourself. Did you have to do a shift in mentality? Did you have to get your ego out of the way to step behind the curtain like that to work, or was it a natural transition for you?
It was a really natural transition. Again, I've never been. The attention has always been my least favorite thing about being in the music business, especially as an artist. I got to town. I started writing songs. I started getting in rooms, and I always say it all happened way too fast for me. I didn't even have time to understand how the music business worked before I got a record deal. I was so green, and again, I'd played all over the world with a band. I could do a bar gig about as good as anybody in the world could, but I didn't understand the business because I'd never been to Nashville and been part of the community. I mean, these guys that come to town and these artists, that are like, oh man, it took me 7 years. I was here before I got a record deal. I think there's a lot of value in that because you learn from your peers, you learn from your friends that are artists that have been, out here doing this and can help prepare you. You meet other music business people that can help coach and prepare you to do that. And in my situation, I got to town and, as I'm in rooms writing with other songwriters and meeting people, Universal was the first label to ever, contact me and say, hey, man, we want to do a showcase. Can you come by the office, play us a couple of songs? So I go do that. Hey, well, we want to showcase. We want you to, come do a handful of songs with your band down the road here at a bar, and we'll bring the whole staff out. And they were the first to do that, and they passed. And then it was just a few short months later that Warner Brothers asked the same thing of me. They passed. And then, man, through a songwriter, introduced to Benny Brown, who owned Broken Bow Records, and he sent me some music. So I sent him some music, and he called me a few days later and said, hey, man, I love what I hear. I think I want to give you a record deal and a publishing deal. And I was wondering if you could just, fly out here to California and play my Christmas party. So me and my band fly out there, and we play for a bunch of people in the car dealership business with Benny. And he asked me that night, he said, hey, man, he offered me a record deal and a publishing deal that night. And it happened really fast. So from the time I really started coming to Nashville and writing songs till the time I signed a record deal and a publishing deal was just, it was just barely a year. Mm-hmm. So it just happened. I didn't have time to learn the business. And from that point, we're making a record, we're going in and end up doing a tour with Jason Aldean and Luke Bryan. Then I'm out with Eric Church in the fall. And man, it's all happening. But looking back on it, man, my least favorite part of it was probably being on stage in front of a lot of people. I've never had the ego or the desire to be the center of attention. So the opportunities when they come, like with Jimmy to be his manager, I really didn't want to do that either in the beginning. And he knew that I believed in him, and he saw that I was able to, my passion for his career and my belief in him. He's like, no, man, I want you to manage me. So to me, it was just an opportunity to not only to do something different, but and help Jimmy, but also to learn more about the business. And again, goes back to what I was saying earlier, man, just to be a part of it, just to be a part of the music business and make a living.
Speaking of working with Jimmy, how do you shepherd an artist like him? Like, how do you shepherd his career? How do you think about his career in a longer arc, in a global sense? How have you taken the lessons that you've learned from the music business and applied them to kind of creating an arc for his journey forward?
Ben, it's interesting. I always say this. I think everybody's path is different in this business. And I think a lot of people have always been under the assumption that every artist wants to be a stadium act. And I don't think that's true either. I think there's a lot of guys that would rather, go out and do 40 theater dates a year and are happy with that. And so I always, with Jimmy in the beginning, like I met Jimmy, I offered him a publishing deal that night and ended up signing him to our publishing company. And man, at that point it was, hey man, what do you want out of this business? Do you just want to write songs because you're clearly talented enough to do that? Or man, do you want to, what is the big picture? And Jimmy's always said, man, I want to play the Super Bowl, man. I want to swing for the fences and this thing to be as big as I can possibly be as an artist. And I'll work as hard as I can to get there. So, and he's proven that he's got the work ethic, he's got the talent. And so, but I think for Jimmy, it was a different thing because he wasn't out playing 120 shows a year in bars. He was here in town for 10 years, building exactly what we were talking about, man, trying to get in rooms with songwriters and meeting people and networking. So for Jimmy, the obvious next piece of the puzzle we needed to acquire was we've got the publishing deal. We need to continue to build on those relationships. But if you're wanting to be a massively commercial successful artist, then we need a partner. We need somebody that can help us do that from a record label standpoint of view. So he started writing a ton of music. We were setting up rights with everybody in town, and he ended up, we said, hey, look, we're going to go in here and demo some of these great songs that you wrote. And through that process, it was, me being in there, kind of teaching him the way records are demoed or songs are demoed or what have you. I ended up, being the producer, and being that role. And it was originally just to be temporary. And, but look, from Jimmy signed his publishing deal, in June of 2016, and then he signed his record deal June 1st of 2017. So exactly 1 year from when I met him, all this happened. But about 6 months into it, we had recorded a handful of songs, and I just said, hey, man, we're just going to do an old school way of we're just going to set up a showcase, and we're going to invite everybody in town, and they might all come, they all might not. There may be nobody there, but so he put a little band together. We sent the music around. We'd done a photo shoot. We sent some of those photos around and just asked people to come and at a little place called The Country in Nashville, which is a bar called The Local now. But man, everybody in town came. I mean, there were people standing outside looking through the windows, and against everyone's judgment, everyone told us not to do that because nobody would come because it's old school. You got to, build a fan base and have labels come out and watch the artist and play at the Blue Note in Georgia or wherever it is. But we just didn't have that option. And I felt like, hey, we've got to get people excited from a record label standpoint. So they did. And John Loba came, and Zach Katz came, and they called me on the way home and said, hey, we want to sign this guy. So it was pretty, it went as good as we could have possibly hoped it would. But, from that point, the next day I told Jimmy, I said, man, you need to find a manager. Like we got to find you somebody that knows what we're doing. And he said, no, man, I want you to do it. I want you to do it because I've been in this town for 10 years and nothing's happened. And your passion has been, the thing that's helped us achieve so much over the past year. And so I want you to do it. And so I thought to myself, man, why not? Why not do it? So I gave it a shot. But it's the contrast is, Matt Stell, this guy comes in my office and he's got a guitar and he's sings me a handful of songs, 3 that he had written by himself. And I was like, man, what do you like? What's the big picture? And he's like, man, I just want to make a living playing music. Mm-hmm. And so this is already a different conversation than past and forward than what it was with Jimmy, because I knew instantly we needed a very commercial machine behind Jimmy in order to reach what point B was in his mind. And so for Matt, it's, this guy, he wants to make a living playing music, is a different approach, hopefully the same outcome in terms of success. And Matt's just like, hey man, I want to go out here. I'm already playing these bars. I want to keep playing bars, and I want to write songs, and I want to keep the lights on. So that's what we did. We said, hey man, let's just start writing songs. So we wrote songs. We set up rights for him to write songs and with other people. And we plugged him into the community, and everybody passed on that, including Sony. I mean, everybody in town. We made an EP that had "Pray for You" everywhere but all. I mean, we had 6 songs on this EP. We shopped it around town. Nobody bid. And then sure enough, we released the EP since we had no takers, and "Pray for You" started getting a lot of traction on the streaming services on Spotify. And so we started seeing really great numbers there, and we shot a video. The video explodes the day it comes out, and then labels started calling. And Barry Watts called me from New York and just said, hey man, I want to sign this guy. He's amazing. The song's a huge hit. Where do we go from here? And so, and through that process, it was, again, it's just like, hey man, this guy, there was no intention of going out here and trying to make this super commercial thing. It was just like, all right, we gave it a shot with the labels. We sent them the music, nobody bit. So we're just going to go about our own way and accomplish what we can, if from an artist standpoint of view and a career standpoint of view with Matt. And we're going to write, we wrote songs and released music, and the public proved to love it. So at that point, the labels are then interested, so, and it's still a different path. Like Jimmy wants to be, have such a presence in film and television. And so, we have to figure out ways when that conversation, comes up. It's like, okay, well, how do we pivot? How do we make both of these things work? How do we make a country music career work and a film and TV career work? Because as we all know, it's hard enough just to have the country career going and sustain that. So we've always tried to figure out, hey man, how can we just make one benefit the other? How can we make one help the other to keep these two going down the track? And then with Matt, it's like, hey man, he wants to have commercial success and go out and be a road guy and play and tour as much as he possibly can. And that's where Matt's space is, and that's what he wants to do. And it's just it's a completely different thing, but it's really fun to be able to have the opportunity to help guide these things. Because look, when I got a record deal, I wanted to, I wanted all the things. And so to be able to help these guys connect the dots for their career is, to me, it's way better than had I been able to connect them for my own self, as an artist. Because man, I liked being an artist. It was okay, but I wasn't good at it. And I never really felt comfortable, 100% being on stage. I never just really had the desire to become very famous. And so to help these guys who do really desire that and want to do that, it's really awesome to be able to take the things that I learned from the time I started a band to the time I started a publishing company. I was able to take all the knowledge and things I've learned and help apply it to helping these guys have a career at a much bigger level.
So those are two very different paths and two very different artists, talking about Matt and Jimmy. But what is the common thread between the two? And what I mean by that is, what are some of the essential qualities you're looking for in an artist and in a songwriter when you're considering working with them?
Sure. Well, they're both very talented. They're both, I feel like from what we've all seen in the music business, like there's people that can get by on their talent, and then there's people that can get by on their work ethic and their networking. And the one common denominator that both of those guys have is Matt and Jimmy are both insanely talented. I think they're both world-class singers, world-class songwriters, but they both have a work ethic that's unbelievable. I mean, they both get up every day and they do the work, and they're constantly thinking, they're constantly coming up with new ideas and new ways, as much as we are in the office. And look at I've got a staff of 7 people that help keep this thing going down the track. And those guys work as hard or harder than everybody in the office. So I think that's it. I think you've got to be the one to put the work in. You've got to be willing to get up and work, because man, again, we've seen people that are very talented, but without the work ethic, I think you're limiting yourself as to how far you can go in this business and how long you can sustain it. And I think that goes the other way too. I mean, look, these guys have been playing music since they were kids, and that's how they've been able to develop the talent that they have. I mean, they've put the time in, they put the work in, and I think that's what separates these guys from so many other people in the business that don't get as far as they've been able to get to.
You mentioned very early on in the conversation that, when you got a look at being on the artist side yourself, both in the band and under your own name, that part of you just thought like, hey man, I am not going to put in what it takes to be on a very high level as, a country singer, very popularly known, nationally known, what it takes to do that. I don't feel like doing that because it's a lot of work. Now that you're working on the other side of it and you're working with these two fellows who are there, can you describe for listeners, what is that work that they're doing? Like, can you describe the different sacrifices that you have to make to perform and remain on that level?
Sure. You know what? I don't think it was. I probably misspoke. I think it wasn't the willingness to put the work in. It was it's more the sacrifices. I think.
Right.
I'm very involved. Like I'm one, my faith is first, and second comes my family. And I think to sustain a career, it becomes very, very difficult for it not to be the forefront of your entire life. And for me, especially once I got married and started having kids and having a family, it was very clear to me that I wasn't willing to put anything, ahead of that, ahead of my family and my faith. So I think anything I can do and anything I can do and still have a normal life, obviously, is the songwriting business, the making records, and the managing is what works best for me, because I can still have somewhat of a normal life, right? But if I wouldn't have been willing to, man, and it's such a different game than it was, the heroes I had coming up, and not to say that they had to do much less, but man, with social media being so involved, having to be so involved in that, and so tethered to your socials. And I feel like the artists these days, there's so many more aspects to it than making a record and going out and touring
Mm-hmm.
and seeing radio. And it's just, there's a million different more things that you have to do to sustain a career. And I think for me, having a family, there's no way, there's not enough hours in the day to do that. And as me and my wife started having kids, it became very, very clear to me that it just wasn't in the cards for me. If I wanted to have a fairly normal life and be able to see my wife and kids every day and put have those as my priority, it would have been insanely difficult and probably more than I was willing to sacrifice.
Yeah. And yeah, it's very interesting that you put it like that, because it's not only would it be the time away, but these days it is with social media, it is harder and harder to put up a firewall between your personal and your professional life if you're an artist. And
100%.
And the family, kids, you want to keep that pristine. You know what I mean? Like you want to keep that private and sacrosanct and pristine.
Absolutely.
And I imagine for guys and gals that get up on those much higher levels, that does become harder and harder to maintain that firewall.
Sure. Yeah. And I see it. Every day with, and look, Jimmy's very good about it, man. He sets boundaries and he does it, and he makes it work. And I think a lot of people do. I think there's so many artists that are able to cater their situation and figure out a system that works best for them. But for me, I knew I probably couldn't. So I just thought to myself, you know what, man, like, and look, as I said earlier too, it's like, it's not even that. It's just, I've never been one to feel like I needed attention or even liked when there was a lot of attention on me. And if you're a successful artist in any genre or very successful in anything you do, I mean, a lot of it comes along with that. And it's just never been my comfort.
Well, I think this is exactly why this was an excellent conversation on this show, because I like any music manager or music producer that comes on and acknowledges that there are some things in life that are more important than music. So thanks so much
Absolutely.
for being on the show, Ash. I really, it's been enlightening to talk to you, man. Thanks so much.
Hey, same here, man. Thanks for taking the time to do it.
This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. Use promo code TWS, the initials of our podcast, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. Ash Bowers runs Wide Open Music in Nashville, Tennessee. If before we meet again you sit down to write, please remember, an expensive drug habit is not a song, a compelling Instagram account is not a song, and most importantly, reverb is not a song. So let all that take care of itself, and for you, just keep your eye on the song.